Hello, this is Dr. Tirrell, and what we're going to look at now is creating our QR code enabled place marks. So the first thing we're going to do is go to the assignments page in the local mapping project. And so just to sort of reiterate how this works, we're creating our online map with at least 5 sites, right? We did that in our last tutorial. This was the demo one. And then at these sites, we also want to think about what tangible place marks, right? So actual material things that could be distributed at these sites could we create, right? So these things work in tandem, the online map and then tangible place marks that would go at these sites and provide digital data, either linking to the map itself or perhaps providing information about the site. You can see we've got some examples here on our local mapping project page. One's local, so Raleigh, well, local in terms of the state level. You can kind of see what these look like. These are street signs, right, that were put up in Raleigh. And you can see it says, for example, it's a 33-minute walk to Dorothea Dix, different sites of interest, and these were to encourage sort of pedestrian exploration of the city. And then these squares over here, these are QR codes. Let me just show you what those look like really quickly. You've seen these before, I can almost guarantee, but it's likely that you haven't used one. They're an interesting kind of technology. They're actually, several years old at this point. You can see the Nintendo 3DS uses them, Starbucks, these in a lot of sort of promotional ways. The reason why is this is all they are. They're just sort of like barcodes, which means they just need to be printed. They can be on anything, paper, you can actually build them in the environment. It just has to be these sequences of color and not color. And what you can do is use a mobile device to scan these and it links to digital data. That's really all it is. These haven't really blown up in this country as much as they have in other countries. They're still used, but it's sort of a niche kind of thing here. But they're not going to go anywhere for a while because they're dirt cheap. Unlike other similar things like NFC communication or RFID, those actually, those are chips, so you have to pay to produce those. Anybody can make those. Anybody can make these, that is to say. We're going to be making some. They're just designs. It's all they are. And when paired with an appropriate app, they can link to digital data. So they're very powerful and dirt cheap, and they can be put anywhere. They're disposable, so they're not going to go anywhere. And they really allow you to do some interesting things. So that's what they look like. We can see how they're being used here. You can see when you saw this street sign, you could point your smartphone and it would give you some information about the route. Perhaps it mapped out your route. I actually haven't looked at these personally. Perhaps it shows you nearby areas of interest. But that's how this works. It sort of bridges the physical world and the digital world. So our place marks, which we're going to be making now, they can be anything. This is a street sign. One of the other examples I put up here are these plaques that were, you can only barely see it here. These plaques that were in this town, they put these plaques up with Wikipedia links embedded in these QR codes. So you could point your smartphone at a historical building and it would bring up the Wikipedia page over that site. When we're making our place marks, and remember, we don't actually have to produce these in terms of printing them or producing them. We just have to turn in the designs. We're making designs of these place marks, and then you're going to output them as PDFs and turn them in that way. You don't have to produce street signs. That's unrealistic. It's just asking too much of you. But we do want to make the designs. And they can be these kind of things, street signs, plaques. They could be little handbills that you might hand out at a site, right? For example, here's a Wilmington music scene map. If we think about realistically what kind of QR code enabled place marks might go there, these are all, music venues. You could have little flyers with QR codes here that would link to perhaps this website, right? That's something to point out. The QR code doesn't necessarily have to link to the map itself. It can connect to other digital data. Just whatever makes sense for that particular site is what we want to get at. So you have a lot of flexibility in terms of the expectations for this project. You want the online map to link to the sites. The sites need place marks with QR codes, but those QR codes don't necessarily have to just link back to the map itself. They could, but they might present other kinds of, rich digital data that you just otherwise can't communicate through a print format or something like that. So think creatively about what makes sense in your situation in terms of what the format of your place mark should be. Right? Would it be a road sign? Or a street sign? Or would it be a plaque? Or would it be a handbill? Or what kind of could you actually paint it on the side of the building or something like that? What makes sense in your situation? You'll be talking about that in the Tangible Place Marks design plan. It asks specifically these kinds of questions, right? What kind of format is it going to take? What or how would it be deployed? So, would it be handed out? Would it be painted on the side of a building? Would it be stuck up on nearby street signs? This asks about exactly those kinds of questions because we're not actually going to, print these out and hang them up. So, all right, so think about that. That's the crux of rhetoric, is figuring out what makes sense in this situation. Nothing occurs in a vacuum where it is a good or a bad place mark or map or whatever. It all has to do with what are you trying to accomplish, who are you talking to, what's the situation, and then how well do these materials do that. To make our place marks, just in this quick demo, I'm actually using Microsoft Publisher, which makes me, sorry, I put the wrong thing up there. Microsoft Publisher, it's for this kind of thing. If you never used it before, it's similar to Word. It's in Microsoft Office, the suite, but it's dedicated to kind of documents rather than generating text. You can see sort of these examples, right? There are things like posters and cards and that kind of stuff. It's kind of a hybrid of a word processor and a dedicated typesetting program like InDesign. If I were actually to make this, I would probably use a single document creation tool like Adobe Illustrator. That's probably what I would use, but that's a really sophisticated tool. We cover that in 319 Document Design, the companion course for this one. If you're interested in that, it's covered in Document Design English 319. We're going to use Publisher because it's accessible. I mean, everyone's got Microsoft Office access here on campus. You probably have it at home too because of the Office 365. In fact, you do. I guarantee you have access to it. Just because you're a student here, you can log into your Office 365 anywhere. And it's for this kind of thing, making a single page kind of document. So I'm not going to use a template because then you have to modify it or else it looks like a template. And that's rhetorically, that's kind of generic, right? So I'm going to start with a blank. This is a letter page, although depending on what I'm doing, in fact, I probably won't use a letter. I might use something like tabloid. Let's say. There we go. Tabloid is actually 2 letter pages put together. It's called that because a lot of times things like magazines are printed on tabloid and then they're just folded at the middle. I'm going to use portrait. It's not going to look any different because it has the same proportions, but it's much larger. If I were making something like a street sign, I'd want it to be larger than just a normal, letter size piece of paper because that wouldn't necessarily work in that context. It's going to get lost against a bunch of other handbills. It may not be easy to put up on, like a large post, something like a light post or that kind of thing. So I've got my page. I'm just going to kind of pull this together. Let's see, based on our example here. You're, of course, going to be making your own thing. This is just a tutorial, so I'm going to kind of make something that looks like one of these, right? And we can see they've kind of got this green background, which is fitting for UNCW. You can see they've got this text and this arrow. I'm just going to kind of whip something together like that. We're not going to pour over how to use Publisher. It's pretty self-explanatory, and we're going to have a workshop where you can experiment. That's the best way to learn tools, is to have a goal in mind and then just experiment, just bonk around for a while. It's always a good idea when you're trying to learn a tool is have a goal, something you're trying to build explicitly, because then you don't have to worry about everything. You only have to worry about what you need to accomplish that goal, and that gives you a way in, and then you can start growing your knowledge laterally, right? So I'm going to go to page design here. I'm going to change the background. None of these colors are right, so I'm going to go to more backgrounds. Solid fill. None of those colors are great. Let's go more colors here. Maybe I'll just choose one from here. That looks pretty close to what they're doing. Yeah, that's not quite right. Let's just, I mean, this is just a tutorial, but still I get hung up on things like this. That's probably more correct. A deeper tint. Yeah. So there's the green background. We'll put in, a text bubble here. Let's draw, let's just use a round rec, a rounded rectangle here. You can see it gives me these helpful guides to let me know I'm hitting the margins. And let's change this to a white fill. Black outline's fine. Let's see. It's got that arrow. And I'm just whipping through this. If I were actually producing one of these, I'd spend actual time and energy. Because design does take work. It's not like when you get better at it, you can just do stuff immediately. You can just do stuff better. It's like, being a runner or a biker or something. It never gets easier. You just get better at it. The same's true about writing and design. It's not like you can just sit down and fire something off that's good in 10 minutes. I mean, far from it. You end up working a lot more because you're aware of the complexities. So design is work. It's pretty close. We'll pop in a text box and we'll make it independent here. We'll just put some generic text. This way to the, whatever. Calibri, which is not a great font. One of the few times Bauhaus might actually be useful. Although I wouldn't, because Bauhaus has become almost cliched. It's sort of like Papyrus, not nearly as bad, or Comic Sans, but it's your go-to font for kooky retro. You can see it looks kind of 70s. Anywho, so that's what it sort of looks like. Let's go back. Yeah, it's the gist of it. And then you can see they've got the QR code. So let's start talking about that. A QR code, as we know, is it's basically something that you can put on a surface. It's a tangible thing. It doesn't have to be in print. There's nothing magic about that. All it really needs is that design. It uses a mobile device's camera. So if the camera can see anything that looks like that, if it's painted on the side of a building. I've actually seen a really cool one where they used shadows. They built something that at a certain time of day, it would cast a shadow that was a readable QR code. It was really kind of cool. So that's all you need. And then what it does is it links to different kinds of digital data. Let me just back up a minute here. You can see here in resources, I've actually provided a QR code generator for us. Let me just open that. There are tons of these on the web. I like this one just because it's simple and it makes sense, and it gives you enough options to be useful, but not so many you're not totally confused. But see over here in type, there are different types of data that a QR code can link to. The default here is just basic text. So when you scan it, it would pop up text. But you can see you can also link to a URL. That's going to be pretty useful for what we're doing. Some of these others may not be useful for our current project, but maybe for stuff you're doing later. Like a V card, that's a digital business card. You can scan a QR code and then it just imports somebody's data right into your address book, basically. That's really useful if it's QR code on your business card, just printed on the back of it. You can scan it and then just all the data gets automatically slurped in. SMS, that means texting. So you can, have it automatically text somebody or call somebody. Geolocation, that's something that may or may not be super useful for us. It allows you to scan and then it just pops up with geolocation data. Geolocation, of course, that's latitude and longitude, so it's a specific kind of coordinate. You'd think that'd be super useful for what we're doing, but it may not be, because it really just gives you sort of your position, and we already sort of know that. it could be like if your map is covering areas or covering a walkway, and you have sort of sites along the way, then geolocation might be super useful because it would pop up and show you exactly where you are in this path, right? So it's an option. Events, so they can sync with your calendar, sending an email, a Wi-Fi password. That's something businesses are using. If you just post a QR code like inside your restaurant, people don't have to ask you for the bloody Wi-Fi code. It just pops up with the, you scan it and then it just automatically kind of logs you in. Okay, so anyway, there's all these different options. You can use whatever is workable for your project. You have flexibility. For grade purposes, you just need a workable QR code that presents extra data, basically. That's really all the parameters are. So that could be, linked to the map. It could be, something else. Let's walk through how to do that. I'm going to do URL here. And one thing I could do is I could just put place marks at all of these different sites. They'd be different place marks because they're for different things. But I could have them all linked to just this map, right? We have here under share, once it's public, and we talked about doing that in the last tutorial, we have this link. Copy it, put it here, and it's going to give me a proof on the fly. Right now, this QR code automatically links to this URL, which will just pull up this map every time. So that's one option. I could put the same QR code in every different tangible place mark, and then it would just always link to this map. So that's one option. Another thing you could do is put more data at the placemark site that connects with its corresponding location. Let me sort of give you an example of that. So like if we were looking at the music scene map, in theory, we could just link to this map with all our place marks, or we could get some information that would link here to the site, and that would be more than you could actually present through a print medium, or just different kinds of data that you could that you couldn't present through a print medium. So I might just MySpace. Let's see if that works. It could be out of date. Well, sort of. Let's say I wanted to at each site. I could just go to each site, and then for each of its tangible place marks, I generate a different QR code for that site, right? So it would go to their website, and you could see different information. This would, since it's MySpace and this has to do with music, it probably would have some recordings of bands. In theory, I mean, MySpace is kind of tapered off. Although it does actually still have a presence with music, but it's very kind of a niche player now. But whatever you want to do is feasible. You have flexibility to use your creativity in this project. You can see once I changed the URL, it gives me a different, kind of much simpler QR code. Once I've got that how I want it, a couple of things. When I go to it's basically ready to go. When I go to download here, it'll give me some options that I want to be aware of. You can leave this error correction alone. Those are different sort of forms of error correction, and it has to do with the design. I'd leave it on the recommended. A border, if you wanted to have, see what happens when you change this. Right now it's got a white border, and when you make that thicker, it correspondingly makes that smaller. You can put it at 0. It kind of depends on what you want to do. The reader does not need the border. It's just if you want a sort of cleaner look here. Well, we'll look at that in a second. I put it at 0 because I don't really need it. We've got a couple of download options, right? These are both vector options, and we'll talk about this, but basically there's two forms of computer graphics. There are vectors, which are defined as mathematical equations. You might remember from our reading material, right, the Manovich New Media. This essentially is graphics that are defined as mathematical equations or vectors. The thing about those is they can be infinitely scaled without loss of resolution, but they can't really handle photorealistic data. Now, this is not photorealistic, so it's a great idea to use vectors, except Publisher doesn't really do well with vectors. It can't really handle them, which is unusual, but there you are. If you're using something like Illustrator, then yeah, go ahead and download it as EPS. Since we're using Publisher, we have to use a raster format. And the difference there is instead of mathematical equations, basically data is stored by pixels. It just tells the computer every pixel, make a blue pixel here, and then next to it a red pixel, and then, a yellow pixel. So it has, basically the color values for every pixel. These are much larger files because of that. It's a lot more data. And they also are not infinitely scalable, and they have dedicated resolutions. We'll talk about this in class, but what it means is you can't just scale up a raster image without it getting blocky or pixelated, because it's just made up of little dots. So when you expand that, the computer doesn't know what to fill in all the area between the distance between dots. Don't worry about that right now. Just if you're using something like Word or Publisher, you do have to use, more or less, a raster or pixel format. I'm going to make the size as large as I can get it because there's a relationship between physical size and or physical dimensions and resolution. I'm going to download it as a PNG because that's a non-lossy format. JPEG is a lossy format. And again, if you remember our reading, the Manovich, when he talks about lossy formats and data compression, JPEG, the way it can make files much smaller is by losing some data. We don't really need to get into how it does that, but it means that the image ends up a little bit blurry. PNG actually is a non-lossy format, as is GIF. So I'm going to, I will download that, but one thing I want to pull up here really quickly is, if you look at our example, let me just back up here. Our example placemark, you'll notice that QR code isn't black and white, it's green. That's another thing about QR codes. The colors don't really matter at all. They just need to be discernible. You wouldn't want them both to be the same color, because then, or even close, right? If I made this a dark gray, see how it's not gonna be able to read that. The contrast is way too low. I'd like to make it the same color as my background. So I'm gonna go here, Publisher. Let's see, what color was that background? Now, you'll notice it doesn't give us the HTML value, which is what that QR code generator wants, but we can actually convert it. This says red, green, blue, 0, 175, 63. That's the RGB value of this particular shade of green. If you actually go to our project page here, I included a color converter for exactly this purpose. So we've got the RGB. Let me just pull that up because I already forgot. 0, 175, 63. 0, 175, 63. Convert it to the hex. Okay. I can copy that, and I'll put that in right here. Oh, wait. I want the background actually to be white. I want the foreground to change color. Yeah, there we go. So I kind of went through that quickly. Just, rewind this video if you didn't get that. The gist of it is the colors don't have to be black and white. They can be really whatever you want. To look up the colors in something like a Microsoft Office thing, you're probably going to have to convert. It's not going to give you the actual hex code, which is what this QR code generator wants. That hex, that's how HTML understands colors. Web pages, basically. They use hexadecimal to define colors. Okay, so I've got my QR code. It's the right color. I do have to use a raster format. Normally, I'd love to use a vector because then you can scale it up and down. It's never going to lose any quality. You can reshape it easily, that kind of thing. But because I'm using Publisher, I do have to go ahead and use a raster. I'm going to download it as PNG here. And notice it says you can use this free of charge, commercial and print. There's no intellectual property issues or anything like that. So I downloaded it. I'm going to close this out, and it's going to give me a little, hey, do you like us? Recommend us. Like anything on the internet, it's free, but there's a string attached. So you don't have to do that. So that's that. Let's go back to Publisher, and I'm going to insert my QR code there. I'm just going to go to Insert, Pictures, Desktop. There it is. You can see because I got it as large as I could, it's large, but that's fine because we can scale down without any quality loss. It's really just blowing things up. You know, you've probably seen this. If you take an image off the web or something and try and expand it, it's going to look cruddy. It looks very blocky because it becomes pixelated. It's because that's a raster image. It's just made up of a bunch of little dots. So when you expand it, the computer doesn't know how to fill in the gaps between them. So it just makes each dot a lot bigger. Okay, so I'm going to scale this proportionally to keep that shape. You don't want to, you know, just do this or something because then it's not going to be able to be read. Always keep that ratio together. So there we go. Now this is obviously not a good place mark, but you get the gist of how this works. We've got the text, the arrow, the QR code here, which I would probably make smaller because this is tabloid size. It's actually a fairly large document. It's 2-letter size pages together. I'd obviously fill in this text. But once I get this to where I want it to be, as our project page says here, let me just back up. The maps are going to be submitted as links. The place marks will be PDF files. You'll be creating a PDF file for each of your place marks because they should be different, presumably. I suppose it's maybe possible to have all of them be the same, but it probably wouldn't be the highest scoring project because it's not taking full advantage of the fact that there are multiple sites, right? It's just not context aware. The whole point of doing this is to make it context aware. So those are PDFs. We just want to go to File on Publisher and Save As. I'll just save it to my desktop here. And I don't want to save it as a publisher file. That's what you should do as you're working so that you can make changes, of course. Once you're finished, then you can spit it out as a PDF. Don't save it as a PDF as you go because that's a delivery format. It's really tough to change PDFs. Their whole point is it should look exactly the same anywhere. Screen, mobile, print, whatever. The trade-off is you cannot edit them very easily at all without specialized software. And even then it's tough. And, you know, we can call this Tirrell Placemark 1 or whatever. Right? You need to make 5 of them at least, depending on the number of sites I'm covering. And here it is in its PDF version, right? So this is what you would turn in. And I will actually, to test these, I'm going to scan these because I can, again, it's a QR code. It could be in print, it could be on screen, doesn't matter. I'll just point my phone at it or my tablet maybe, and it'll scan this. It'll link to whatever data is embedded here. We can actually do this during the workshop if you'd like to see how it goes. That's the gist of it. I think we've covered everything I wanted to cover in this tutorial. All the different kinds of data, how to embed it into your design. Yeah, I think we've covered everything. So remember that if you look at the calendar, you're watching this now. In class on Thursday the 11th, you're going to have your tangible Placemarks design plan in, and then we're actually going to have a workshop related to it, right? You'll be doing the map making workshop on the 4th, so you know you may have already done that by the time you watch this. But then we'll have a dedicated workshop for how to work with QR codes, how to produce these tangible things, right? So just like everything else, we're going step by step. If you have questions, you know, you'll be able to get some practical experience during the workshop, and then you can talk to me then. Okay, that's it for this one. If you guys have any questions before I see you again, you can always email me or come into office hours. All right, I'll see you guys later.